Well, hello everyone. My name's Louise Savage of Louise Savage Muses, and for once I'm standing up. Welcome if you're joining me for the first time. Welcome back if you've suffered this ridiculous display of waffle before. Anyway, the sun's shining outside. It's a lovely day, and I thought I'd come in and do a little bit of recording before I go out and meet up with a friend for lunch. I'm very lucky, it's my day off. I know I've had one or two requests over the last 12 months to have a look at my bookshelves, have a nosy through my bookshelves. So I thought this year I would frame some videos around that. And where better to start than at the beginning, because I am one of these people who arranges my books in alphabetical order of author. So we've got A's this morning, but not all the A's because I think there are far too many for one video, sorry. And my aim is to try and make a video each month which focuses on my books. Now that's probably going to take me 2 years, but hey, you know, I might decide to do 2 a month. I just don't know where this is going to take me. And actually it's a really lovely kind of nostalgic journey for me as well, because it's lovely to look back at what you've read, and I'm absolutely certain that some of these books I'll have completely forgotten about. It'll be news to me that they're on my shelves. So I've got fiction over here, and I don't know whether I can swing the camera around without knocking it down, but I have all my sort of, over here, all my classics books, all my history books, lots of art books, etc, etc. And then round on the other side of the room, I've got loads of poetry, classics, travel books, and lots of CDs, hundreds of them, because I do love a bit of music as well. I don't know whether that, yeah, hopefully that's, you can see me okay. Anyway, without further ado, we'll start. No, there is going to be more ado. We need more ado because I need to explain that I haven't filmed like this before. So if I turn my back to you and start waffling on, I apologise in advance, because at some point I'm going to forget. And I'm probably also going to have to grovel for my glasses as well. But hey, it's Tuesday, so who cares? Right, okay, so the first book, in fact, I tell you what, it might be better to go several books at a time, otherwise it might be here forever. So the first book actually on my bookshelves is called The House of the Mosque, not at the mosque. And it's written by Kader Abdullah, who actually, I believe, writes in Dutch. So this was translated from the Dutch into English, and that seems to me to be quite unusual. I don't think I've read anything. I could be wrong. What language did Anne Frank write in? Probably Dutch. But, you know, it seems to me to be quite unusual. I really enjoyed this when I read it because it follows the... it's set during the Iranian Revolution, when the Shah's power was on the decline. It starts with, I remember, a scene with them getting hold of a TV, a black and white TV, so they can watch the moon landings in this house of the mosque. The house has belonged to, I can't remember the name of I want to say Ali Shah. I can't remember the name of the main sort of character. But anyway, well, actually, in some senses, there isn't one. It's a family saga, this is, so there's lots of different characters. But so they buy this television and they watch the moon landings, which kind of helps to pinpoint it, I suppose, for the reader in terms of context. And then we sort of follow this family who've lived in this house for over 800 years through the decline of the Shah and the rise of the Ayatollah. There are stalks, there are fabulous characters, there are rooms to wander around. I remember really enjoying it. And I love books that, as you'll see, I think, possibly with the A's, books that really take me to the Middle East, the Far East, and help me to kind of start to contextualise and empathise with the different situations, that confrontations over in those parts of the world. I better put them back as I go, I think. Toing and froing going on. Okay, so then we've got The Kindness of Enemies by Layla Abu Layla. Try again. No, I'm not going to try again. Now, this book, I think, is really, really pertinent because this is about a youngish woman who's researching into one of the Caucasian Wars, so conflict with Russia in Europe. And one of her students is arrested, and he's got this very sort of dodgy email address called the Sword of Shamil or something, because he owns this sword that's belonged to some key historical Muslim figure. And then there's a counter narrative that sort of takes place in the 1800s about a woman called Anna who's taken captive by, again, I think it's a Shah, I want to say Shah, because he's furious with the Russians for kidnapping his son, so it's kind of a revenge capture, and it tells her story as well. So in light of the sort of current situation in the Balkans and with Russia and Ukraine, I think it's, you know, it's well worth a read. Challenging, I think. Yeah, it's very well researched. It's quite, I would say it's quite an academic novel in many ways. But yeah, well worth a read. Next up is Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart. Now, I did a video last week about what might constitute a Penguin modern classic, and this certainly would be one that I would be considering. So it was written, because I think it was written about 1959, and it's one of the first novels to be published in English by a Nigerian writer. So it is a classic, and it really helps you to understand the sort of decline of tribal life, as Nigeria is affected by the influx of the British, etc. So yeah, a really, really important novel, and questions not just the African identity, but also looks at questions about nobility and what, you know, and masculinity as well, I think. So yeah, really interesting, very interesting read. Next up, shouting now so you can hear me, we have Douglas Adams. I've brought them all out at once. So there's The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and then the others. My favourite actually is So Long and Thanks for All the Fish, because I love the idea of the Babel fish. So for those of you who don't know, Douglas Adams wrote these. It's comedy and it's set in a sci-fi environment. There are things like the Babel fish that you can, I can't remember, did you put it in your ear? I think you put it in your ear. And it helps you to translate any language. It's hilarious. The answer to the universe is 42, apparently, according to Douglas Adams. But even more, I probably enjoyed just as much the Dirk Gently books that he wrote, which I think perhaps aren't quite so well known. This one's Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency. And Dirk Gently is just this really kind of anarchic, wonderful, surreal detective investigating the most unusual of crimes. I think there was a TV series a few years ago, Netflix or somebody, I can't remember. But these are just absolutely joyous, and they really withstand being read aloud as well. There's some very good recordings. The BBC did one years and years ago of this series. So I really, really recommend these if you've never come across them. They will really cheer you up. What else have we got? We have The Behaviour of Moths by Poppy Adams. This is a kind of British stately home. I don't know if it's quite a stately home, but this huge rambling house. And it's a story about two sisters. What I love is that one of the sisters hasn't been to visit the house where she grew up for oh God, I think 40 odd years or something. So it's about their relationship and her returning to the family home, which has some very dark secrets. It's quite a gothic book. And also the key character is a collector of moths and an expert on moths, which is why it's called The Behaviour of Moths. I really enjoyed this. I think this makes a really good holiday read, especially if you like your kind of gothic-y Laura Pacelli. I think maybe it's better than that. Okay, and what else have we got? We've got, oh, this is a wonderful, wonderful novel. And I think Ayobami Adebayo's just brought out a new novel. I could be wrong about that. Sorry if I'm getting a bit close to you. Salt. Stay With Me. This is, again, I think it's born out of Nigeria. It's a story about a woman who is, well, about a marriage and what happens in that community if you can't conceive. So the leading character can't and does everything she can to, and the family of the married couple, who really, you know, love each other, sort of insist that the husband takes on a second wife. I read this quite well, several years ago, and it really has stayed with me. Some of the scenes in here and how tortured both the husband and wife in the relationship become, and how family interference and attitudes towards fertility as well. Yeah, really, really well worth a read, this one. Mornings in Janine. So this time we're off to the Lebanon. This is a story about, again, a family saga. It looks at Palestine, the political history there. And again, I absolutely adored this book. It's not for the faint-hearted. It's, you know, there's real tragedy in here. But I've certainly reviewed this before, I think, on one of my earlier videos, and really recommend it very highly. This novel I don't think needs much introduction, and it's really odd, isn't it? You know, looking at my bookshelf as I'm toing and froing, I have read far more than this one book, Americana, by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. I think I've read probably all the ones she's written, and I think probably the is it The Purple Hibiscus? I think that might be my favourite. This one, though, really looks at the kind of academic world of Nigeria, the difficulty in flitting from Nigeria to America and back again. It's a novel about fitting in. It's a novel about, oh gosh, well, I mean, I could go on, all sorts of things. I thoroughly enjoyed it when I read it. I wouldn't say it's my favourite of hers, though. I think probably, as I say, I think it's The Purple Hibiscus that is perhaps my favourite. And then Friday Black, actually, which is a wonderful collection of short stories by Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah. I hope I've said that correctly. Again, I read this some years ago, and very often with short story collections, there are maybe one or two that I enjoy, but I remember really, really enjoying this collection of stories. I think my my reading collection is nothing if not eclectic. And by the way, I only tend to have books on my shelves. I only tend to keep books on the shelves that I've enjoyed. So, you know, these have kind of been quite carefully culled. These books, I was absolutely passionate about as a child. I read these when I was quite young, maybe, I don't know, 11 or 12. So this is my version. I wonder what it says inside. Yeah, look. Oh, well, actually, I had this copy in 1982, but that's because that's the year Simon was born. That's my son. So that was bought. This wasn't the original one that I read, is what I'm trying to get out of this. The original volume I read was borrowed from the library and was much bigger than this. But this is a beautiful little old-fashioned book. And these are Harrison Ainsworth's Old St Paul's, which is the one that you can see, the orange one. Is a story. I mean, he was a Victorian writer of historical fiction, so I think you have to take what he wrote with quite a pinch of salt. It's sensationalist stuff, and in Old St Paul's he covers the Great Fire of London and the Great Plague, which of course are really quite fascinating, gruesome moments in British history. And there are lots of amazing scenes. It's called Old St Paul's because that's where a lot of the plague victims end up, but also there are huge, and this is not the current St Paul's Cathedral in London. There was one prior to that which burnt down because of the fire. So there are some incredible descriptions in here of that kind of thing. It's sensationalism. The other two, one's called The Tower of London, the other Windsor Castle. Again, they're I wouldn't describe them as rollicking reads because, of course, we've got all these lengthy, wordy sentences and so on. But as a young reader, I think probably he and Jean Plaidy and Anya Seton really, really firmly entrenched me as a lover of historical fiction. So I'm very fond of these books. The President's Garden, another favourite, Mushin al-Ramli. I've raved about this book before on several occasions, I think. I don't think Simon's read it yet, and Simon very kindly bought me a second one of these, which I haven't got round to read, of his novels, which I haven't got round to reading. But I did, again, really enjoy this. It's set in Iraq. It's the era of Saddam Hussein. It starts with this really grim description. It's a rural village, and some banana boxes appear with the heads of 9 of the village men in the boxes. So it's pretty gruesome. But one of the main characters, one of the things I love about this novel is that it focuses on the elder men in the community. You know, it's not about young whippersnappers. And one of the main characters, the title, it's called The President's Gardens because he goes and works in Saddam Hussein's gardens. He can't remain in the village. He has to get work elsewhere, and that's what he ends up doing. So you get kind of insight into that whole very, very exotic, luxurious world that Saddam was living in. Then we've got Leela's book by Alice Albinia, and this is a story that's set in India, and this is a very unusual read. I don't, you know, if any of you've read it, I'd quite like to know what you think. Alice Albinia spent a couple of years in India, and then took on this huge feat of writing a novel that's based on the Mahabharata. And so, although it tells a sort of a family, very complex family saga, you've also got characters from Indian mythology, Hindu mythology, that creep into the story. So we've got Ganesh as one of the characters, the elephant god. Layla herself is an incarnation, a modern incarnation of a divine character, living in New York with her husband when 9/11 happens, and she returns to India. Her husband sort of persuades her to go back, and yeah, it's about kind of how that world impacts on Indian society, but also lots of kind of messages about Indian religion, the Indian social strata, etc. It could be criticised for poking fun at those things, possibly, I don't know, because it is sort of quite satirical, I would say. But a really, really interesting comment on India. And then here, this is a really unusual book called The Pomegranate Tree. I can't remember, I think I heard somebody talking, I think I maybe heard the writer. She is called Vanessa Altin, and I think she's worked in some sort of quite hard-hitting journalism. And this is the story of a Kurdish girl, again, living in a rural community in Syria. And it's a really brutal, visceral story of what happens to her during the, well, I mean, the last, I don't know, how long ago, decade or so. It's illustrated as well. You get these sort of quite naive but really hard-hitting illustrations all the way through. There's a map there of Turkey. We've got all these dogs that mean something to the lead character. I think it might have been written for children, but I think you'd have to read it with your child. That's how I feel about it. I don't think I would want necessarily. I'm not suggesting that children shouldn't be aware of the horrors that are going on in the outside world. In fact, I think it's really important. But this book, again, is not for the faint-hearted. The Pomegranate Tree. Trying to make sure I put these back in the right order. Okay, and then, oh wow, we have, well, what do we have? It's so battered. It's so battered that it doesn't oh, I didn't put a date on this. That's such a shame. This, again, is a very old, probably Victorian copy of Little Women, which I'm sure needs no introduction. And I've also got my childhood version of Good Wives there. I think Louisa May Alcott is probably pretty well known to you lot out there. But if you haven't read her, I love the fact that her writing well, first of all, she's a female published in the Victorian era, but also that she's writing about women's lives at the time and what it's like to grow up as a young woman in America during the American Civil War. I might have got that wrong. Oh, I think it was. Okay, then The Power by Naomi Alderman. I really enjoyed this. It's a what if women ran the world novel. How would the world be different, and if men were subject to the sort of sexism that women are? I loved the premise of it. There are some corking moments in here. It's kind of obviously sort of what's the word? It is dystopian. You'd hope it would be utopian, but I'm not so sure about that. And one of the things I loved about this at the time was that it kind of spans, I mean, it's futuristic, but it spans the whole globe. It doesn't just focus on one specific place, looking at what would happen if women gained power, as the title suggests. Very clever premise for the novel. And the final three for today, because this is the end of that very first shelf there. The Bread the Devil Need, which was one of the books that was shortlisted for the Women's Prize, I think, last year, and follows the story of a young shop assistant who is treated incredibly violently. Lisa Allen Agostini, sorry, that's terrible, I couldn't remember her name. Again, you know, really sort of clever way of illustrating domestic violence and abuse, and a sort of, I loved, even though I can't remember her name, Althea Lopez, that's it. She's living in Port of Spain, and even though I can't remember her name, couldn't until I just looked, her character has kind of stayed in her head, in my head. Now, finally, and this Isabel Allende spans over onto the next bookshelf. So I'm slightly cheating here by bringing her in this time round, because I suspect she'll come up again. I really enjoy Elizabeth Allende's writing. She is a Chilean author. She writes oh my goodness, my brain. It's magical realism. That's the phrase I'm trying to look for. The first one I read of hers was Eva Luna, which is this one. And again, this is kind of reminiscent a little bit, but perhaps more playful, of the, what was it called? Layla's book, because it, you know, you're sort of flitting in and out of the real world as we know it and the spiritual supernatural world. Eva Luna, the main character, is able to tap into all of that, but she also has some pretty intriguing, she has an intriguing life, not an easy life, a really harsh life. She finds herself doing all sorts of things. I think she works as a prostitute for quite a long period of time. But again, it's a wonderful insight into South America, South American thinking. Yeah, Isabel Allende is just one of those cracking storytellers. You know, I could imagine sitting by a fire, curling up, listening to her, telling her tales all night, and it would just be an absolute joy. So more about her next week. And finally, before we finish, just look at this beauty. I know. This is a lovely bookend that when I first met my husband, these were actually his. He had these on his bookshelves, and I just think they're really beautiful. So this is my lovely little duck that is propping up the end of the shelf. Anyway, I think 25 minutes is long enough of my musings. Should I say, maybe I should change it to Louise Savage Rambles, I don't know. Anyway, I have to pick a novel before I go out because I'm going to have to wait for my husband later, so I'm going to need something to read, and I've just finished my book, but I'm not going to tell you what it is because I'll do my wrap up for January next week. Anyway, lovely people, hope you're out doing wonderful things. If you're not doing wonderful things and you know, life's a little bit tough at the moment, which I think it is for many people, I just wish you lots of love and friendship and joy, and look forward to musing / rambling next time. Bye.